Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for some of you. Thanks for joining this very special edition of Beyond Compliance with our continuing coverage of the COVID-19 global pandemic. My name is Aaron Bolshaw. I'm the VP of Marketing for Safety Chain, and we've got a great presentation for you today. Beyond Compliance is an ongoing industry update for food and beverage facility operators, QA, safety, compliance professionals, and we're really searching right now for North America's, and we're tapping into North America's brightest minds to help tackle this crisis. So it's my pleasure to be joining today. Very quickly on the top, just for anyone unfamiliar, Safety Chain is the #1 plant management platform that improves yield, maximizes productivity, and ensures compliance for food and beverage manufacturers. We are in over 2,000 facilities in North America, so we are on the essential category, as many of you are on this call. And we are the only complete solution for production. Think about OEE, SPC, food safety and quality programs, that QMS side, and even supplier compliance. So, all right, now that that's out of the way, before we get going, I just wanted to give a couple of helpful tips on a couple of items. We're still seeing a few technical difficulties stemming from our webinar platform, coping with all the folks working from home. So you might experience some difficulties, and we will assist as many people as possible getting them in. Be patient though, please. So everyone's on mute, but we do want to hear from you. I know that sounds odd, but please use the console, the webinar console, to ask us questions, and we will be getting to as many of those as we can today towards the end of the program. And then always, everybody here is going to get the recorded version of this webinar in a few hours of the close. We're going to get more information out to you. We want to make sure that you have information in your arsenal to help cope with what's going on. So. Well, with that, it is my distinct honor to welcome two undeniable leaders in the area of food economics, Professor Laurian Unnevehr, to agriculture and consumer economics from the University of Illinois. So fantastic to have you here, Laurian. Thank you for joining us. And also Professor Dawn Thilmany, Associate Director, Community and Economic Development. You're at Colorado State University, beautiful part of the country. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, so I'll say very quickly, and I'm going to hand this over to you, Laurian. The webinar series is earning its name today. We are going way beyond compliance, and I think it's a good thing we are. So many thanks again on the front here for both of you putting in a lot of time and effort, putting a great, compelling presentation together today. And Laurian, it's very timely. Why don't you take it from here?
Okay, great. Thank you, Aaron. And I just want to say how very pleased Dawn and I are to have this opportunity. And we want to thank Safety Chain for providing this platform, for taking a first look at the economic impact of COVID on the U.S. food system. We've divided our comments today into 3 buckets. First, Dawn and I are going to do a tag team effort looking at markets, changes to what consumers are buying and how products are being delivered. Then I'm going to take a look at policies, mostly the federal, but also state and local, and how those are rapidly changing to address the challenges the food sector is facing. And finally, Dawn will take us through some of the innovations that are emerging in the food system to address this new normal. Next slide.
Sorry about that. There's a little bit of lag time with the amount of traffic that we're seeing, so please continue.
Okay, great. I thought it was useful to step back and first put this in context and remind everybody about the very unusual circumstances we're living in. As of this morning, 265 million people in 32 states are under shelter-in-place or stay-at-home orders. Over the past month, we've seen a 35% decline in stock market values. Last week, we saw a 5 times unemployment claims. There were 5 times previous recession records. And there are many private analysts who've projected negative growth for US GDP in 2020. just one example there. So that's a sobering set of indicators of where we're at and the kind of difficulties the food system is operating under. It's also useful because I know many people online are not economists, just to review a little bit some perspectives on size. The US economy is approximately $21 trillion. And the coronavirus relief package just enacted is about 10% of that value, so a very substantial infusion of stimulus into the economy. The food sector is 1.7 trillion, an important sector within the economy, and that 1.7 trillion covers everything: farms, transportation, food processing, food served in institutions, restaurants, sold in grocery stores or at gas stations. Next slide. So our main point that we're going to highlight and return to, because it's shaping everything going on, is that the US food system is undergoing an extremely rapid shift from food services, that is food consumed away from home, to the grocery sector, that is food consumed at home. And so I'll be using those acronyms as we move through this: food away from home and food at home, to indicate those two giant pieces of our food system. And as we look back at the Great Recession, we might have some clues about what we might see this coming year in terms of consumer food expenditures. At that time, in 2008 to 2010, we saw a drop in total food expenditures of 5% in real terms. Also a shift towards food at home, but less dramatic than what we're seeing now, and a rise in food insecurity. Of course, what's different now, besides the speed of what's going on, is that we have a hoarding psychology afoot. People have been stocking up, and as even if they weren't planning to stock up, as they see empty shelves, that's a cue to continue buying and look for those things you think you might need. So we've had a run on storables and freezables. At the same time, and almost running counter to this, something very different from 10 years ago is the rise of our delivery culture, on-demand platforms, both for restaurant takeout, grocery delivery, and of course the demand for that has just exploded. At the same time, we see a category collapse as there's less demand for specialty items, and both the consumers and manufacturers focusing more on their core brands and core product lines. Taking a look back at some historical data, we can see here total food expenditures in nominal terms. The green area, the food away from home, of course, growing faster than food at home and accounting for more than half of food expenditures since 2011. You can also see that blip there with the Great Recession, an actual decline in total food expenditures, which was unprecedented in the post-World War II economy. And we might see similar this year. Taking a look now at the next slide, we see food insecurity increased in the Great Recession. That is the percentage of households having trouble putting food on the table, getting enough food to eat. That went up from about 11% of households to over 14% in 2008, and really only returned to pre-recession levels in 2018. So again, that's something we might see again in 2020 if these economic conditions persist. I'm turning it over to Dawn now to take a look at the very most recent activity in markets.
Thank you, Laurian. As you can all imagine, when an event happens as quickly as this event has taken place in the US, finding data that's timely and relevant is a little more tricky than usual. One resource that a colleague introduced me to that I'd like to introduce you to as well is the SafeGraph data presented here, and this will come up a few times in the next few slides. What they're using is they're using mobile phone traffic pattern data to try to track foot traffic. And even though that doesn't tell us about volumes of business going into businesses, it does give us a glimpse into what might be happening that's affecting our food supply chain. So this first graph kind of summarizes what's happening in the restaurant sector. Something Laurian already alluded to will be a very important factor. because as we know, with the stay-in-place orders continuing to roll out and get more rigid and be extended, we know one of the sectors that's been necessarily hurt probably is the restaurant sector. So this shows you between 2019 and 2020 how that traffic has drastically changed and affected that sector. We do see it hasn't gone to zero because we have seen some creative actions on the part of restaurants to make curbside delivery, and luckily a delivery system culture had already started, although it's pivoting as we speak. And the reason I put sit-down restaurants side by side with the counter service restaurants is, of course, those counter service restaurants already through their takeout windows and delivery culture of, say, pizza delivery, were a little more nimble to be able to react and save some more of these sales. But this is going to be pretty significant, and it's reverberating throughout the supply chain, and we'll talk about that throughout this presentation. Just to confirm what that already shows, Open Table shared some of their network data, mostly across the US, but some other developed countries, and shows just how precipitously that decline in activity happened across their restaurant network, and how important that's going to be to people who had some of their product already in the supply chain intended to go to those audiences. So now let's look a little bit about what's happening with food at home. And so you can look at that exact same data. On the left-hand side is supermarkets. And as Laurian already alluded to, we saw that huge peak a couple of weeks ago when people first thought they needed to get their house in order and stock up on a lot of products. And we have seen that foot traffic decline just as expected in these very recent days. Again, partly because the stay-at-home orders have become a little more rigid. But what's also interesting, and what they just added to this website in the last week, is now they're actually breaking down some of that foot traffic data so you can look at major metro areas. So some of you are in supply chains that are sourcing in different parts of the country and want to know what that looks like across the country. You can see there is some variability. And again, that's probably very strongly connected to how rigid the stay-in-place orders are in those areas. So now let's look at one more graph in this data series, where Walmart and Target are also interesting to look at, because in addition to carrying groceries in most of their stores and noting significant activity about 2 weeks ago, they've seen the same drop off. And you can see them again lined up against a whole lot of other retailers who have been able to stay open at least to a limited amount because of having an essential service status. And the other interesting thing to note, you probably can't pull it out here quickly, but up to this point in time, Walmart was actually struggling this year and actually behind its sales for the previous year, whereas Target was fairly strong. They've actually reversed in space, and now Walmart has actually regained a lot of what they had started off as a weak year, partly because of this event. And again, these are all going to reverberate a little bit through the supply chain in different ways. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Laurian to talk about how some of these shocks to the supply chain may be adding new uncertainty and risk to players throughout the chain.
Thanks, Dawn. So taking a look at the flexibility of the supply chain to respond to this sudden shift in demand and expansion of demand in certain categories, we can see some pressure points. One would be potential disruptions in international sourcing, because we do import 13% of the US food supply, and it's particularly important for certain categories. We also import packaging materials, and there may be shortages even of key ingredients for those materials that have competing demands, for example, in cleaning fluid. Labor availability is another pressure point. We've already seen reports in the media of disruptions in food processing plants due to the need to quarantine sick employees when an employee tests positive for COVID and perhaps exposed other employees. We've got concerns about the H-2A program, which provides temporary visas for farm workers. Even though late last week, the State Department waived some of the requirements for letting those workers in, there were reports in the press this morning about delays for getting labor to harvest certain crops in Florida. And finally, within plants now, as they're complying with the guidance about spacing out employees, that may also tend to slow down harvesting or processing. Logistics, another pressure point with the shutdown of trade from China, for example, stranding containers. We have truckers facing challenges as initially truck stop restaurants were mandated to close, but just finding services along their routes is another example. And in general, the efforts to reduce waste in recent years has meant a shorter pipeline that is more rapidly emptied. Next slide. So just looking quickly at U.S. agricultural imports, you see they have been growing over the past decade. The green area in these bars are the fruits and vegetables, and those are particularly important supply in that category is supplied by imports, particularly in certain seasons, but there's also some palm oil, oil seeds, sugar, and of course the tropical beverages that are important. Next slide. We have trade within North America that is quite important for the food supply. In 2019, we got significant shares of our total food imports from either Mexico or Canada, as you can see there in the slide. And of course, fruits and vegetables coming in from Mexico. Trade with Canada, lots of cross-border trade, both on ingredients, processed products, different components of the livestock supply chain across the border, both directions, so quite an integrated food economy. And of course, products are still flowing across borders, even though people aren't, but any disruptions in those supply chains would introduce challenges for the U.S. food supply. I'm going to turn it back over to Dawn now.
As we've been alluding to, a lot of our concerns about what the economic impact of this event will be are based on how disrupted the supply chains are for how long. Just to get a sense of what's happened with the country, of course, that was first affected by this outbreak, we can look at what was recently shared about China and what it's seen with its exports. These are not specific to the food systems, but it's the best numbers that I could find. And you can see about when the event really did ramp up there in the last quarter of 2019, you did see that precipitous drop in China. And now, of course, as it's reverberated through the EU, we've seen a very similar drop. And again, our primary concern there is that in addition to the typical raw and value-added ag and food processed products we know will be disrupted, China had become such a source for a lot of the packaging and supply chain materials we take for granted are important for seamless operations throughout our supply chain. So it's important to note we're probably looking at least a 4 to 6 week disruption in getting those back to normal. Another way to think about this spatially is what's going to happen in different parts of the US. As I showed before with some of the graphs from SafeGraph, we're even seeing this really play out quite differently across the United States, not just in a public health dimension, but also what we feel like will be vulnerable economies. So the Brookings Institution put together very recently this update that I thought was quite interesting. And the map on the right shows where they expect there to be the most affected economies. And these are based on vulnerable occupations. And as you can guess, the very first ones were the tourism and leisure industries, including restaurants, but also some other supply chains that will, if disrupted for a long time, will have a hard time sustaining, and energy is in there as well. So you can see across the country, the darker the color, the more likely they're expecting those economies to be hit the hardest. But what was really interesting to know too, is even though metro areas are expected to be the least affected because they have the most diverse economies, we actually have some agricultural rural communities they expect to be the very least affected because at least so far, their workforces are exempted because of being called an essential services. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that's the silver lining and the bright story, but that there might be other things if we start seeing labor affected by the public health outbreak. When asked in a recent survey what was their biggest concerns and headaches. Of course, those restaurant operators had probably the strongest opinions because they were impacted the quickest of anyone. And so the ones that are staying open, of course, are doing pretty significant operational changes and looking at sourcing contingencies because supply chains are going to be disrupted for a while. I think if you redid this survey now, just 2 weeks later, it would be even more stark because, again, we've seen a significantly higher share of them close down in just the last 2 weeks. And now if we look at what the food manufacturers are seeing when asked the same questions, I was a little surprised that they saw travel policy and restrictions as something that was going to affect them until I realized they were in the same supply chain as those restaurants. And so what we're really seeing as a story playing out is the supply chain was full of about 1 month worth of food, and about half of that was intended to go to restaurant accounts and packaged and in the volumes that go to restaurant accounts. So even those travel policy restrictions are being felt back by the food manufacturers because different people are buying their food, even if in aggregate the same amount of food is being bought. And then these operator communications, I think this is where when you've had your planning horizon change from a 6-month planning horizon to a 48-hour planning horizon, we've really seen companies struggle to figure out what the new normal is. So next slide. Now we're going to switch over to talking a little bit about what's happening with policies to respond to some of these disruptions.
Thanks, Dawn. First of all, I'm going to talk about policies at the federal level, and I have to note that everything is changing literally day by day in terms of rules and regulations being issued that are trying to assist the food sector in adaptation. Ag and food was declared an essential industry by Homeland Security in mid-March, so continues to operate even where shelter in place is in effect. But it was soon discovered that there were many supporting services that had shut down. And so actually Homeland Security has been updating about every 3 days and expanding what is declared an essential industry. So for example, very recently addressed this concern about truck stop restaurants. They are now essential and should be reopened to assist logistics as just one example. I'm going to talk quite a bit about the coronavirus relief package, the so-called CARES Act, which was enacted late last week. So that includes about $500 billion that will go in some form of direct payments to households or unemployment insurance benefits. The unemployment insurance benefits will be both larger dollars, more dollars per week, and more weeks of eligibility for those who apply. Obviously, this is going to shore up consumer demand somewhat, and particularly, of course, food as a necessity. And now I want to turn to some specifics in the CARES Act that impact the ag sector. Next slide. Yeah. There's a total of $25 billion for food assistance in the CARES Act. That includes a 20% increase in SNAP funding, SNAP or food stamps as it's commonly known, as well as additional funding for school lunch and WIC. Now, I think it's important to note that there is no increase in benefit levels allocated in this bill. These funds are just to meet the expected expansion and participation as more people are out of work and become eligible for some kind of assistance. There are also some funds set aside to deliver surplus commodities to food banks through emergency food assistance program, as well as for food delivery to the reservations and territories. An important provision of this bill suspends the proposed rule on work requirements for SNAP. That rule had been in process for a couple of years and was expected to reduce participation by as much as 700,000 people. That rule's been suspended in light of current economic conditions, so those people will continue on SNAP. There's also some state level flexibility announced just on Friday that states can treat this like a hurricane or another natural disaster and can choose on their own to increase benefit levels under SNAP. And then I won't belabor this, but just SNAP, as with all the other direct payments to households, does have a multiplier effect in the economy as households turn around and spend those dollars, and that stimulates other economic activity. Next slide. So food assistance delivery is becoming a lot more like the rest of the food system in terms of moving to basically delivering things to consumers. For school programs, many school districts have instituted off-site or curbside pickup for the free and reduced price meals. Several rules introduced again just on Friday to allow greater flexibility in that delivery, and even to allow states to issue those benefits in EBT form. So basically school lunch would become just like SNAP, and those benefits could be spent at a grocery store. That flexibility also applies to the smaller child and adult daycare feeding programs. I think it's interesting that the USDA was already experimenting with using online ordering or allowing online ordering for SNAP benefits in 5 states, working with Amazon and Walmart. California jumped on this just recently and wanted to expand to Safeway. And of course, that would make SNAP benefits even more part of this delivery culture and would benefit those households with elderly or disabled individuals. There's quite a bit of provisions for small business, and some of them are specific to ag and food in the CARES Act. There's additional funding to keep USDA meat plant inspectors on the job with expanded shifts. There is a substantial loan program to companies with less than 500 employees. And the provisions of that program are quite generous. Those companies can borrow up to an amount that is equal to 2.5 times their payroll. If they use those funds to keep workers on payroll and pay for salary, health insurance premiums, and rent, then the loan will be entirely forgiven. The baseline for keeping workers on payroll is employment levels either in early 2020 or mid 2019, again allowing some flexibility for businesses with a seasonal fluctuation in payroll. And of particular importance to the restaurant sector, there's a provision to allow franchisees to benefit. That is, if you own 4 outlets of a major national chain, you can qualify as a small company, even if, of course, that national chain did not qualify. Next slide. There's also continued federal aid to farms, an additional $23.5 billion to USDA for support to farmers, with a fair amount of flexibility given to USDA and how that is used. Basically, this continues and replenishes the trade war relief program that had been underway this year. So $14 billion in expanded funding for the Commodity Credit Corporation, along with provisions to allow greater flexibility for producers in applying for those loans, or even in requesting to defer repayment. There's $9.5 billion in specific funds for livestock and horticultural producers who aren't eligible for CCC loans. Next slide. At the state and local level, there is some experimentation. The declaration of ag and food as essential workers, for example, Minnesota and Vermont jumped on that and declared those workers one step further to be emergency relief workers, and that actually allows them to have subsidized childcare, for example. Some states have these unemployment insurance programs that include a work share program where employees could work up to 5 hours a week and still collect benefits, and of course that might help out the restaurant sector. There's also at the local level some experimentation with keeping restaurants viable, tax holidays, free parking for delivery or pickup, and even the flexibility to offer mixed drinks to go. And of course, as liquor is a significant source of the revenue stream in restaurants, that helps them to stay afloat. I'm going to turn it over to Dawn now to talk about innovations.
Well, that last example of changing local laws is a really nice transition to talking about innovation. I do just want to note, we do know we're moving through a lot of material really quickly, partly because we want to leave some time for discussion and questions at the end. And that includes particularly in this innovation space. We went and try to find some great examples, but we're hoping part of the question and answers is other things you all know are going on out there that would be good for us to know our food supply chain is doing to adapt in these times. Just a couple of things we want to note that we've been made aware of is we're hearing an increasing number of stories of food manufacturers starting to run their plants 24/7, adding shifts, limiting the production runs to key stock units. So instead of providing that diverse set of flavor choices for consumers, just making sure a sufficient supply is getting out the doors to restock shelves. Again, we've typically had about a month of food supply in the chain at any one times, but because of this disruption, that ran closer to empty than it has in the past. Plus, it was, again, some of it had to be pivoted from that food service sector to the retailers. The meat processors are particularly active right now. We've seen lots of stories where they're running extra shifts and the margins are quite strong in that position. But again, just as we expected might happen, I saw the first news this morning of a plant in Pennsylvania having to slow down because there was a significant enough part of the labor force who might potentially be sick that there's some concerns. And so extra steps are going to have to start being put into place to make sure they can keep those plants open and running. But we're impressed to see how well the food manufacturers and processors have stepped up to the challenge of keeping the supply chain full. This is because, as we saw, even though they're slowing down a bit, we saw food retail sales jump 20 to 100%, depending on the part of the country and the category. And meat was one that saw a significant jump. A recent Barclays report said it was at least as strong as a typical holiday season. And again, in a time that the retailers weren't expecting to have that kind of flush activity. And the shift of product lines from that food away from home market to our retailers has asked our policymakers to flex a little bit on regulatory expectations and changing some of the labeling requirements. You may even walk into a retail store now and see relatively large batches of meat being offered up, where typically you don't see a pound or two package as the usual. Taylor Farms is one example who's been shifting their packaging quickly so that they can better meet the grocery store demand for their products. And in response, we've also seen the retailers continue to hire employees, sometimes actively working with their workforce centers in their states to engage some of those workers who did lose their opportunities in the food service markets. But again, it's hard to know how permanent or temporary that'll be, because as we saw in the sales data we looked at before, and from what we've seen in China and Italy, we do know that those retail food sales will eventually decline as people's pantries and refrigerators are stocked up. So again, back to restaurants. We've seen a lot of creativity where the restaurants who are staying open, when allowed, are partnering with their local breweries, wineries, and distilleries to do some joint delivery or joint curbside pickup points to keep markets open for the full set of those who have been most affected. We're seeing an increasing attention to touch-free delivery protocols. I think I saw a news story where some restaurant chains are on their 4th version of updating what their protocol is and actively using technology as part of that. And again, in the grocery delivery, we call that the last mile delivery sector. They'd already been gaining some ground, but the volumes and shift in volume was something they weren't expecting. So they're hiring as quickly as they can. Some of them, including Amazon, have shifted to only making their promise of quick Amazon Prime delivery for essential products. But we also have some small and mid-sized food manufacturers who may not have been on those platforms yet, but are quickly finding their way to moving on to the online platforms because whether Amazon suits them well or not, or they're finding one that's more localized, some of the small mid-sized farms and food manufacturers were the most affected again by the closure of restaurants particularly. So I gave just a couple of examples here. Oregon Tilth had a great webinar just last week about the shift to online platforms. And if you want to go look at what's happening in that space, I gave you 2 examples you could go explore. Next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. This is all amazing, and the thing that keeps sticking out to me the most with all of this is the sudden nature of everything. It was a light switch, right? So the consuming food in a restaurant or the takeout side, how that's all blended and shifted mostly to, we're using our refrigerator more, right? Mine is really full. My oven is getting worked overtime as we are under, a stay-at-home situation here in California. And that's been the most pronounced part of how do innovations really help the whole food supply chain? And listen, I'm going to be biased. Laurian and Dawn, you know this. I'm a software company, right? I've loved and lived in software for many years, but it doesn't solve everything, and that's not the whole story of innovation, right? I've seen a lot of local breweries and restaurants start to shift their entire meal planning to be curbside pickup, right? I've seen them open up online stores like you're talking about. They're trying to just stay alive and keep food going out through their doors. One of my favorite stories of innovation, and maybe this is more on the marketing side, but a local taco restaurant near me was offering food packs, right? So you can feed a family of 5 or a large family, and they were offering toilet paper with it. Every order would actually get a roll of toilet paper because they had a big stock of toilet paper. They just weren't going to be using it in their restaurant. And so things like that, or using crowlers. If you're familiar with those, it's like a canning methodology that you can can beer with or other liquids in a restaurant legally and then serve them for takeout or to carry. Some bars are actually mixing drinks and putting them in there so you can take home these innovations continue to pop up. And I wanted to talk just a bit about some of the safety chain stories of innovations, and then we're going to switch because we've got a lot of really great questions coming in. We're seeing that from our customers, we've been very proactive. We've gone out to our customer base and said, share with us your stories. We just want to know what you're doing, how it's working, so that we can share these stories with other customers, because no one really knows how to handle this. It's all new for everyone. So we've got to make we have to respond to this disruption together. We're seeing more and more use of mobile devices that allow operators to actually do their work in remote areas. We also saw very quickly one example of one of our customers who's a large confectionery and chocolatier. They were instantly out the door with a supplier compliance measure, just asking all of their suppliers how COVID-19 was going to impact their own ability to service them and to supply them with the raw materials it took to put the candy and the confections together. And it stands to reason. These are the things that the executives in these food organizations need to understand to be able to forecast this year, because this year is going to be a mess for many industries, and it's going to be a boon for others. Still yet, a couple other stories coming in from our supplier or our customer base of conducting remote audits. This is an interesting new sort of frontier where how can you conduct an audit, and this could be, several different types of audits. The one in particular we're talking about is on-site supplier audits, where you go and you want to make sure that your suppliers are doing the right thing within their facilities to make sure that they're giving you the good raw materials you need, right? Well, how do you do that remotely? We're working with customers to be able to do that via, mobile technologies, right? Because that's what this is ending up being with the restrictions of social distancing and all of these things. And that leads to another really interesting innovation that the engineering team at Safety Chain has been working on feverishly to help support our customers, which is now that you have to stand further apart, but you have to have more collaboration than ever. And I think, was it Dawn or Laurian, you covered that one piece about one of the top 3 concerns was communication and collaboration. And we see that. And it's important that the speed at which we are able to communicate and collaborate is working in conjunction with the actual production facility, right? It's not just about, hey, can I text somebody something? Can I make it a record inside of our production facility so that everyone understands what that really quick change is? So there's a lot more of these. I'm not going to get into too much more. We've got some cool questions coming in. So we will have a white paper that outlines some of these other stories that we're harvesting from our customers. And I would just ask everyone on the line, do something to share a story of how you're managing this disruption with innovation. It doesn't have to be with us. Call another food facility or try and connect with somebody, or even better yet, we're going to give some information here in a little bit. Share with one another how you're overcoming these things, because it's going to take everybody to work our way through this. And so a couple of things before we set it down. Unprecedented. No one's been through this. The change occurring right now in our economy and the food sector is so massive, it will have a long-lasting ripple effect. That's not just on the markets. As Laurian was pointing out, these policies are going to continue to shape and put different regulations in place to safeguard against this in the future. The demand for food, relatively robust. Even in economic downturns, we see that. But it is going to be, it's going to reshape that curve a little bit, where people are eating at home and outside their home. The major shifts within the food sector are very unique to this event. However, it will impact the consumer's preferences. I liked how you spoke a little bit about, Dawn, those categories. Some are getting killed, right? While others are just having to shift a little bit. We're going to continue to see that as consumers now pick up a new habit, right? Once new habits form, that's when marketplaces and food producers are going to really have to sort of refigure their approach. So again, more challenges ahead. Food sector is proving, that it's both flexible and resilient. My ask of everyone, if you are in food production, from agriculture to manufacturing to even the restaurants, share stories online. Get out there, share. What are you doing? What's working? So that we can all get through this unique situation better. Laurian and Dawn, thank you very much. I'm going to leave this up for a little bit, because you've been very gracious and said, hey, if people need help or if they have further questions, you were taking some online questions, so we can certainly drive. So my hope is that you get great questions, but it doesn't it doesn't flood your inbox. But hey, if it does and you're able to help a few people out, fantastic. So with that, I'm going to leave this up for now, and we've got a lot of really great questions. So one I see keep popping up a few times talks about a unique market, a farmer's market. So and I'll dish this up for both of you. How can farmers market vendors sell their fresh products now? And I know this may not be a policy or market thing, but what are your thoughts?
This is Dawn, and that's a particular sector I've worked a lot in. And again, as I try to answer there in the box a bit, but to elaborate a bit, we have seen already one webinar and another one's coming up from meat producers next week about a switch to online platforms. And so we had already seen online platforms taking shape across the country, but they're expanding. And I gave an example of a couple up above in the slides, which they are going to make available. The second thing is we have had in many states, farmers markets be included as an essential service and are going to be allowed to stay open. I know LA County just put a condition on that they're not going to let a farmers market open unless there's a very detailed protocol and plan for how they're going to manage the distancing. And then I guess the third thing I would say is they do qualify for some of the programs that Laurian mentioned. I did also see a question about the small business loan programs.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a slide at the end if you want to go to that, Aaron. But what I would say is Small Business Administration is probably going to be ill-equipped for the volume of people coming through that program right now. The first step that you want, as he pulls that slide up, the first thing you want to do is try to find out if the current bank that you use as a business is already approved as a small business lender. They actually have a certification program you go through as a bank that you can become an approved lender under small business. If that's the case, getting access to those loans is going to be far easier for you. And so just to be clear, Laurian talked about some aid coming through USDA, which would be people who truly qualify still as farms and create more raw ag inputs like oranges and beef or milk. If you're someone who's doing a value-added product like perhaps a salsa or a jerky, you're more likely to be a small business. So keep going. Two more slides, Aaron.
Two more. I wasn't sure which one.
It's the very last slide, 47.
Was there one on CARES?
There it is. There it is.
Yeah. So if you are registered more as a limited liability company or a sole proprietorship, this is going to work for you with the Small Business Administration. And what they're doing is they're giving quick $10,000, I think is the level that's kind of automatic, but you can apply for more, where they're going to make it fully forgivable if you keep your workers on payroll and can show that $10,000 was used for allowable expenses. And the most clear one is keeping your workers on payroll. Again, the first step you'd want to do is to figure out if your bank is one of those qualified small business lenders, but otherwise I don't want to keep getting into too much details, but we do have this link here at the bottom, and you would want to Google Small Business CARES, and there should be your local Small Business Administration office should have good information for you, but I know they're completely overwhelmed right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as is. Yeah, and that's fantastic. Thank you for taking that one. That one I saw come in, Dawn, and I wanted to make sure we tackled that because I sense there is a lot of nervousness, right? So thanks for this is also everyone. We went through the presentation really quickly because we did want to get to these questions. So keep them coming in. We see them. There's a lot more to this information. Everyone's going to get this whole slide deck, not just the stuff that we covered through the webinar. But Laurian and Dawn have been very thorough in their approach to looking at this from these three sectors. So make sure, everyone's going to get this after we're done.
So Aaron, I just wanted to make one little small comment on the farmers market.
Yes.
So some of them have actually gone the same direction as restaurants. So you do an online pre-order with a vendor, and then you drive up and pick up. I know that's going on, for example, in Minnesota with the winter markets there.
Yeah. Yeah, as we come out of it, those markets are going to start feeling a little bit more as things start popping up in the northern states. So we did get a question about how can a food producer possibly audit remotely. Jim, thanks for that. We'll contact you a little bit offline, but in general, basically, it is going to take a little bit of care. If you can imagine this, though, vision this, the computers, the supercomputers we all have in our pockets, otherwise known as smartphones, can be used to do visual inspections. And so when the visual inspection can be used to complete an audit, that's really what we're talking about. However, we know, Safety Chain knows intimately there are much more details that need to be handled than that. And as a part of your safety programs, you have to, that have to be auditable themselves. There has to be some really strict protocol. So we're working with a couple of our customers right now to define that and get it out into production right now. But it is a real possibility, and we've seen some of our partners even start to look at, hey, how can we enable our marketplace to do what they're doing more remotely, but still have the real, safety and regulatory and compliance issues handled. So thanks for that question. Okay, so let's go into one where about Q&A, or I'm sorry, I'm looking through here. So here's one from Clarence. I appreciate it. Any recommendations that every American can do to lessen the impact of COVID? Dawn or Laurian?
Well, we're not public health experts, but we, as much as we know it's hurting a lot of our businesses, we agree that people just need to stay home and minimize how much they're out. Again, this is why we're really impressed that restaurants, retailers, and even local food providers are finding creative ways that we can do our handoffs of food or our shopping for food with it needing to not mean as much time and exposure as possible. I guess the concern that didn't get raised today is we are expecting a whole lot of workers who probably feel very proud that they've been named essential to still put themselves at risk to make sure we can keep our supply chain from being disrupted. There was several programs in the CARES Act that will make sure those people are better taken care of than they have been historically. Without getting political, they tend to be a group of people who are less insured, are less likely to get paid with sick leave if they have to go out. So they've probably had the temptations to work when they're feeling sick, but luckily there's been some policy changes to make it possible that they're more likely to be covered if they do need to stay home when they're feeling ill. But we're starting to see some strikes happen from the Instacart people and Amazon people in pockets. And I guess our concern is just be very empathetic and supportive of making sure that part of the workforce feels supported and lifted up. Our healthcare providers, of course, are getting that most positive attention, but I think our food supply chain workers are going to need just as much support because they're not staying home right now and they're having to be out and work jobs so we all can keep fed. So I guess stay home, but for those people who can't stay home, make sure we get fed, make sure they feel supported, both tip well and make sure when those policies start rolling out that you're supportive and understanding of why we need to make sure that set of the workforce is treated pretty well throughout this.
Yeah, very good. And I would definitely direct anyone to CDC website. They've got a lot of information. We've heard it all over the place. The tips remain the same. Wash your hands for 20 seconds. Keep social distancing. Just follow the rules that we're seeing go into place, and that will help us get through this. So, I've got a couple other questions here. Do you see that the impact of this crisis will alter the agricultural landscape in the U.S.? Dawn or Laurian?
Well, I have just replied, I think, to somebody in the question stream that it seems pretty clear to me the rise of delivery culture has just gotten a huge shove forward, and that the consumers who have the means are going to expect that more and more, and then having kind of these systems in place. If I fully support what Dawn said. If we can take care of the labor force that's engaged in all of that, then I see that expansion as being something that will be persistent.
And I'm not an international trade expert, but I think we're going to see trade patterns change for at least 4 to 6 quarters, which is pretty significant in the ag world. It does help that we have a fairly integrated North American system, and so far it looks like that might not be as extreme, but I do think a lot of companies may rethink their portfolio of where they're bringing products from and how resilient they can be if something like this were to either last longer or happen again. So I think you'll see patterns at least be rethought. And, I guess the other thing is, not sure, but I imagine we may rethink a little bit of what's going on in the regulatory framework around food and agriculture. A lot of laws have had to be bent pretty strongly through this event. And I think it's going to be pretty hard to make a determination of like, okay, all the rules are back in place. So whether it's liquor laws or what we're doing for the flexibility of food entrepreneurs to figure out how to do that last mile delivery in a cohesive and efficient way, I think we may even just see us rethink some of the platforms we had in place that made a lot of sense 100 or 50 years ago, that now we will have to, after seeing this experience, rethink what is the most effective and efficient.
Yeah, good. All right, we've got time for a couple more questions. This one coming in from the chat. And it was referring to the FDA relaxing the labeling requirements to move items in the grocery store. Somebody was asking for an example of that. They couldn't see, they were trying to see, what do you mean, like what kind of a food labeling? Can you give an example of that one, another example of that?
Yeah, so for instance, two good examples. When a restaurant will bring in their meat products in the back for the chef, it'll be boxed beef, they call it, where the primals are kind of broken down, but sometimes they even may choose to cut their own steaks. That is what some stores are capable of also handling. But for instance, a restaurant would get maybe a 20-pound chub of ground beef, whereas as we see in the stores, usually it's more typically a 1-pound chub with all of that nutrition labeling required by the government on calories, percent from fat, and so forth. Well, for restaurants, that's never been needed. So there's been some relaxing about if they can just quickly reshift some of that product that's not labeled quite correctly for a retail channel, for the retail channel to use. Think of a big can of tomato sauce that would be, kind of like you'd imagine at Sam's Club, but they're even bigger, that again, a restaurant would be getting, that wouldn't need quite the labeling you would expect for a consumer product good. So it's some of those things that were in what we call big or wholesale format sizes that need to be pivoted over to the retail storefront, but they were labeled with every intention and assumption that they would be going through the wholesale institutional buyers who don't require quite all of that. I hope that clears that up.
Yeah, I think it does. That's a good example. Yeah, I mean, if you think about what's amazing to me is exactly how much you both have such a deep knowledge of this, where about there's 26 days of food in the system at any one time. Well, when one outlet for that food, namely restaurants, right, it gets kind of shut down, what happens to that food supply? And we're just living through it right now. How do we figure it out? So I think we got time for one more question, and it was in reference to some of the problems food production facilities were having, or their top concerns. What kind of the question is, what kind of communications are operators struggling with? They were so that was in I think that was the number 2 reason or impact area. Dawn, can you take that, or maybe Laurian?
Well, we did not do that study. We found it to share with you all, but because I knew the question, I went and talked to some people in my local world that I know, and I think what they at least thought it probably meant was, so whenever you onboard an employee, you obviously have and this is true for something as big as Starbucks, you have a training protocol you have them go through, you have them shadowed for a while, and they figure it out. Well, when
apologize, we seem to be having a problem with our audio.
Single part of your system changes and you're going 24/7, how do you actually?
All right, well, yeah, so you're cutting in and out, and I think I'm really sorry. We're going to wrap this up though, Dawn. You're cutting in and out a little bit, so I'm going to wrap this up. Just everyone, most of the questions we have are, do we get the recording? Do we get the slides? You're going to get everything. Okay, so be patient. We're going to follow up with everyone. Thank you very much for your comments. Laurian and Dawn, thank you. Wow, this is fantastic. And please know that both Anne and myself, we'll keep in close contact with you guys as this develops. We may even want to do an update later on, but from everyone here at Safety Chain, just there's loads and loads of more information, safetychain.com. You can email our panelists, and we even have, Safety Chain has a COVID readiness kit for food manufacturers on our website. So go check all that stuff out. Please be safe out there, stay well, and thank you for everyone who has to go into work so that we can eat. This will conclude today's presentation of Beyond Compliance. Again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.